Hello, hello. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Just getting ready to get my computer going here. So lovely to see you. My name is Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. We're going to be continuing our reading of Astrology, Karma, and Transformation by Stephen Arroyo, The Inner Dimensions of the Birth Chart. If you watched our introduction, we introduced the book, talked a little bit about it, talked about Stephen Arroyo's vibe. It's a very spiritual idea expressed through a very grounded psychological Western therapy, clinical, his own clinical experience on the ground as a relationship and personal life counselor. He combines this with his inherent readings and cultural cross-checking of different religious and theological cosmologies. Brings it all into a simplified essence that's wonderful for anybody trying to take the many different scattered cookbook elements of astrology and bring them into a clear whole for yourself or for whoever is your client. Whether you are a client seeking to get a better grasp on your astrological counselor and the language they use, this book is for you. As well as if you are an astral counselor trying to get your own grasp of how you can best reach your client. This book is also for you. I also like to say that I'm a Vedic astrologer, but I started off with Western astrology. And this channel, I've been bringing the wisdom of Vedic astrology and showing it in the West. Now I'm bringing the wisdom, the clinical experience of a Western education-based astrologer and showing how the psychological analysis of the Western variety is useful to anybody who is into Vedic astrology and the Indian sense of astrology. I think this book has a lot to offer the Veda world as well as all astrology. So let's dig in, shall we? As usual, this is a live feed. If you want to ask any questions, make a comment, and I'll do what I can to speak to it as per the appropriateness of the subject at hand. So thank you for watching. We are now on Chapter 1, and what Stephen Arroyo has done, a metaphor for what he's doing in this whole book, is synthesizing the ideas of astrology into a coherent whole. Now, there are mandalas for each chapter, which is upholding the essence of the sign, and this typically relates to the nature of the chapter. This chapter relating to karma being the unconscious unfoldment of the energy that has come from the Pisces, the past. It's unconscious, it's Aries, and you'll notice that the symbol for Aries, I'm going to write in my own book because I can, because it's my book. Notice that the symbol for Aries, this little thing, it looks like a wellspring, looks like a sprout. The sprout can't help the nature of its unconscious genetic data. We can't help the nature of our karma that emerges like a wellspring from our unconscious, but we can direct the waterways. So, Chapter 1 of Astrology, Karma, and Transformation, we are getting into the chapter called Karma. And this is the quotation that starts this chapter. Hopefully you guys can see it. Yes. What happens to a person is characteristic of them. They represent a pattern, and all the pieces fit. One by one, as their life proceeds, they fall into place. These patterns, the pieces, they all fall into place according to some predestined design. This is really holding down the philosophical essence of astrology in general, and particularly the Western astrology of Stephen Arroyo. But even in that predestined design, we can imply a conscious observance of the past and a new approach in relationship with the past. This is astrology breaking us out of fate into the true free will of infinite awareness. Just the point here is that even when you do awaken into your karma, that was bound to happen too. Let's read up on it. This is starting our first part of the reading of the book. Stephen Arroyo says, oh, this is cool. I'm going to try to add this. I've got a Grateful Dead quote in here. Let's see if... Stephen Arroyo says, the word karma is used in so many ways by occultists, astrologers, and others concerned with the universal laws that guide our lives, that in considering the relation of astrology to karma, we should first of all clarify the meaning of the term. Basically, it refers to the universal law of cause and effect, identical with the biblical idea that whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. The Grateful Dead phrase that I was thinking of here is, one man gathers what another man spills. And the two men in this figure are actually the same soul incarnated in two different lives. One man gathers in this life what the old man in the last life spilled. This law is merely the broader application of our earthly ideas of cause and effect. It's obvious that no one who plants thistles can expect to harvest roses. The law of karma is similar to the law of Newtonian mechanics that states, for each action there is an equal and opposite reaction. The only difference between the universal law of karma and the mundane physical law of cause and effect is the scope of existence that each embraces. The law of karma assumes that life is a continuous experience, not by any means limited to one incarnation in the material world. The universal law of karma, then, can be seen as a way of achieving and maintaining universal justice and equilibrium. It is, in fact, one of the most simple, all-encompassing laws of life. It is inseparable from what some have called the law of opportunity, i.e., a universal law that places each of us in the conditions which provide the exact spiritual lessons we need in order to become more godlike, as it were. The concept of karma is based upon the phenomenon of polarity, by which the universe maintains a state of balance. This is not to say a state of inertia, but rather a dynamic, constantly changing equilibrium. Inherent in this concept is the assumption that an individual soul or entity, in some schools of thought, has within itself the causal power which eventually bears fruit, the effects. The faculty which initiates this process is the will, and the whole structure of the causal phenomenon is called desire. Desire can be seen as the application of the will in such a way as to direct the person's energy toward the manifestation of an impulse or an idea. Desire can be seen as the application of the will in such a way as to direct the person's energy toward the manifestation of an impulse or an idea. So, the whole idea of karma is, of course, inseparable from the theory or law of reincarnation. Although some authors have considered karma and reincarnation to be metaphors or symbols of a cosmic process far more subtle than is apparent in the popular conception of the term, most people who have accepted the teachings of reincarnation and karma as a living reality are satisfied with the traditional, even obvious meanings of the words. Meaning of the word. For most people, the process of reincarnation simply refers to the periodic manifestation of immortal beings, souls, or spirits through the medium of the physical world in order to learn certain lessons and to develop specific ways of being as a preparation for a higher state of being or consciousness. According to the reincarnation theory set forth in the psychic readings of the great clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, now often called the Sleeping Prophet after the title of Jess Stern's best-selling book, all entities were created in the beginning and periodically reincarnate in order to learn the fundamental spiritual lessons: love, patience, moderation, balance, faith, devotion, etc. According to the psychic Cayce, it is often an aid to spiritual development to have a knowledge of basic universal laws, such as reincarnation, karma, grace is a good one, like begets like, and mind is the builder. The law of grace is the most important in the Cayce psychic readings. Wow, I said the grace thing and didn't even see that sentence coming. But I get it. Grace relating to the joyous unfoldment of nature within oneself. Like Newtonian mechanics compared to modern nuclear physics, the law of karma seems to operate at a rather gross level compared to the law of grace, which, according to Cayce, supersedes the law of karma when one opens oneself to the Christ consciousness within. This Christ consciousness is the human experience of oneness which has no reaction because it does not take place at the level where the law of polarity or opposites operates. Hence, if we accept Cayce's concept of the law of grace, we find that the law of karma is not the ultimate force underlying our lives. Still, it can be helpful to understand karma, what it is, and how it works. That's why we learn astrology, in order to get beyond it. Cayce himself has stated that each lifetime is the sum total of all previous incarnated selves, and that everything which has been previously built, both good and bad, is contained in that opportunity, i.e. the present incarnation. Throughout his thousands of recorded psychic readings, Cayce repeatedly stressed that when a person was experiencing a specific kind of problem or a stressful phase of life, he was simply meeting self. In other words, that the individual was now having to confront the very experience that he had created in the past. A metaphor in my modern astrological wanderings, again, I'm a Vedic astrologer, recently, Tropical Vedic. So I still use the same Western measurements. You know, October to November is what Scorpio is. I'm not a sign back. There's a guy who's also a Vedic guy who uses Western measurements. His name's Viktakara. He uses this metaphor of the face of a clock. Okay, let's say Uranus is transiting your natal moon. Or Saturn, that's a better one. Saturn is transiting your natal moon. Saturn's tough, gripping, harsh nature has to go past the most obliteratingly honest and pure, emotionally vulnerable sense of yourself, and it has to go through there and make a process through there. When that happens, let's say the minute hand is at 6 o'clock. Let's say 6 o'clock. The hour hand, rather. The hour hand has reached 6 o'clock. What does it mean that it's at 6 o'clock and it's at this difficult time? Well, it came from all the way around. It's gone through a whole loop, and now it's meeting up, and now you have to meet self, face self. Whether that spinning of the hour hand was in this life, or whether your moon transits your Saturn when you're 6 years old, and you had no previous life, or no, you've only been living 6 years, so you couldn't possibly have lived through a whole cycle of Saturn. But in your past lives, the hour hand got to 6 o'clock because it came from 3 o'clock. The gears working inside the clock have taken the time to slowly sift and click up to the place where this experience would be happening. This is Vic DeCara's metaphor of how the things that happen to you in life don't just happen for no reason. There's a casuistry, a phenomenology of cause and effect. Exactly what's being said here. The law of karma. Oh shoot, sorry, I just lost I keep losing my darn screen because my new screen kind of sucks. There we go. When it happens, it freaks me out because I think that I'm disconnected. I'm all good. Sweet. The law of karma, at its grossest level, is expressed in the biblical axiom, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Stephen Arroyo notes in a little... Why don't I just give you this visually? Come on. For those who care to investigate how widely references to karma and reincarnation appear in the Bible, see the following. And then, I know it was clear for just a moment there. Well, I know the words were clear for a moment there, so feel free to read those for more biblical references to karma and reincarnation. One cannot overestimate the power of desire as the deepest force initiating karma. Only the separate ego can desire, for the essential self, or the soul, is already one with everything, and so desires nothing. In essence, the law of karma tells us you get what you want eventually. But of course, we may not understand the ramifications of our desires until we experience them. For example, a man may desire material wealth. So in a future time, he's born into a family of astounding wealth and luxury. He now has what he wanted, but is he satisfied? No, perhaps not. Other desires arise immediately, for the nature of the restless mind is to produce desires. In fact, the man may come to realize that his newfound wealth is not only unsatisfying, but even a horrible burden. At least when he was poor, he had nothing to lose, so he was free. Now, wealthy, he continually worries about losing what he in fact no longer wants, but yet is attached to. The question then becomes, how can one release or be released from his desire-forged attachments in order that he can again be free? The great English poet William Blake called these attachments mind-forged manacles. This freedom is the sought-after goal of all paths of liberation and techniques of self-realization. The greatest wealth of insight about the nature and workings of karmic law is found in the writings and teachings of various spiritual teachers, most of whom are from the Orient, and whose teachings, therefore, are rooted in Buddhist or Hindu, Eastern Vedanta traditions. Paramahansa Yogananda, one of the first Eastern spiritual masters to spread his teachings widely in the Western world, my boy, Paramahansa Yogananda. It's a great, highly recommend this book. This book is where this quotation that we're about to read comes from. Paramahansa Yogananda, one of the first Eastern spiritual masters to spread his teachings widely in the Western world, wrote a beautiful and inspiring book entitled Autobiography of a Yogi, in which we read the following. My darn light's not getting it. In which we read the following quotation. I wonder if I can get this. I wonder if I can, something like that. Yeah. I want to include this when I read this. You guys, blah. You guys aren't going to see it anyway because we've got this quote. And I think this is better because then you can see the quote. Okay, I'm with it, folks. So this quote comes from Paramahansa Yogananda. Fate, karma, destiny, call it what you will. There's a law of justice which somehow... Sorry, I gotta check if you can see it good. There's a law of justice which somehow, but not by chance, determines our race, our physical structure, and some of our mental and emotional traits. The important thing to realize is that while we may not escape our own basic pattern, we can work in conformity with it. That is where free will comes in. We are free to choose and discriminate to the limits of our understanding, and as we rightly exercise our power of choice, our understanding grows. Then, once having chosen, a man has to accept the consequences of his choice and go on from there. This is wonderfully steeped in this combination of psychological neuroprogramming, which gets stuck in every action, and as a detached perspective on that, coming from the pure awareness of the Atma, rich in the spiritual traditions, which I think is beautiful. Yogananda further explains how to deal effectively with one's karma and what the proper attitude should be towards one's destiny. This is him continuing. Seeds of past karma cannot germinate if they are roasted in the divine fires of wisdom. The deeper the self-realization of a person, the more they influence the whole world by their subtle spiritual vibrations, and the less they themselves are affected by the phenomenal flux which we call karma. Yogananda was also intimately familiar with astrology, since his guru was a master of all the ancient arts and sciences. His comments on astrology and the scope of its relevance are therefore worth considering. This is more Yogananda. Right. See, sorry, for a second I thought maybe this was coming from his guru. And I think this first quotation might be from his guru, Sri Yukteswar. But the second one comes from Yogananda. Don't quote me. Either way, Yogananda is the one who would have paraphrased his teacher's quote here. So, in the book, Paramahansa Yogananda says, "A child is born on that day and at that hour when the celestial rays are in mathematical harmony with his individual karma. The horoscope is a challenging portrait, revealing the unalterable past and its probable future results. But the natal chart can be rightly interpreted only by men of intuitive wisdom, and these are few." It's a very important phrase. Even me as a astrologer I'm in school right now trying to fasten my understanding of astrology, and it can only come from a certain level of understanding and wisdom, especially since at this point in life I'm only 28 years old. But the only way that you're going to get a grasp of this intuitive wisdom is by developing some kind of knowledge and experiencing it in life and experiencing this intuitive wisdom. Knowing whether someone has that wisdom is a very difficult thing, but I digress. Occasionally, Yogananda tells us, I would tell astrologers to select my worst periods according to planetary indications, and I would still accomplish whatever task I set myself. It is true that my success at such time has been accompanied by extraordinary difficulties, but my conviction has always been justified. Faith in the divine protection and the right use of man's God-given will are forces formidable beyond any other. That comes from Paramahansa Yogananda. Now, to continue, in Buddhist tradition, the goal of liberation techniques and spiritual practices is called nirvana, a term which has not been correctly interpreted by many Westerners seeking to penetrate the depths of Buddhist wisdom. The literal meaning of the term nirvana is where the wind of karma doesn't blow. Nir meaning negating, and vana meaning wind, action, karma. Nirvana, no karma, no wind. No wind is the concise definition. The concise translation, sorry. Nirvana, the translation is no wind. The definition is no karma. In other words, the only way to achieve spiritual progress is to awaken. Buddha means simply one who is awake. So the only way to achieve spiritual progress is to awaken to a level of awareness beyond the domain of karma and beyond the planes of illusion. One can gather from these teachings that the only way to deal with karma ultimately is to rise above it. However, as long as we incarnate in the physical form, the law of karma affects us in one way or another. And it would thus be extremely useful if we could achieve an understanding of the karmic patterns with which we have to deal in this life. If for no other reason than that it would enable us to face our destiny with grace, acceptance, and fortitude. An ancient tradition in India goes into great depths in its analysis of karmic law, dividing types of karma into 3 groups. And this is good stuff. I'm going to eventually do another Vedic astrology interpretation book, and we're going to talk about this very thing. Dividing types of karma into 3 groups. 1. Pralabdha karma is considered the fate or destiny, karma which must be met in the present lifetime. This basic destiny pattern is considered to be fundamentally unalterable, simply a pattern and sequence of experiences which the individual has to deal with in this incarnation. Pure genetic number data. It is stated, however, that a spiritual approach to life, the help of a spiritual master, or simply the Lord's grace, may occasionally intervene to lessen the impact of particularly heavy karma, thus making a sword thrust into a pinprick. Or it was once a sword thrust, it's only a pinprick. That pralabdha karma is always there, and some divine intervention might help lessen it and reduce it, but it's kind of always going to be there. Now, kriyaman karma is that karma which we are now making in this very lifetime, the effects of which we will have to face at a later time. The primary reason for the sometimes severe disciplines of various spiritual paths is that such control on behavior can help the traveler on the path to refrain from making more karma, which would inhibit his spiritual progress in the future. Other than practicing such disciplines, the primary way to avoid creating karma in the present is to refrain from intense desires and attachments. while simultaneously cultivating the proper spirit and detached attitude in carrying out our daily duties. Just let it run off. Naturally, maintaining the proper spirit and detachment can be very difficult, and it is considered in most spiritual teachings to be absolutely impossible without the aid of meditation, rightly so. Lastly, Sinchit karma. Sinchit karma is the term given to the reserve of karma that we have accumulated over many lifetimes, but which is not specifically active in this incarnation. According to these teachings, the Vedantic sense of karma, we have, over thousands of incarnations, accumulated such vast karmic entanglements that it would be impossible to encounter all the results of past thoughts and actions in one lifetime. We would simply be overwhelmed physically, psychically, and emotionally. Hence, that portion of our karma, which is not allotted to our present lifetime's fate or pralabdha karma, is held in reserve. We will, according to these teachings, have to face all of that karma also, sometime in the future, unless a perfect spiritual master relieves us of some of that burden. It's a very interesting thing. It's also interesting to consider that if that were to happen, it might imply some kind of spiritual luck, because a lot of the times, maybe a spiritual master wouldn't just do it for you. A lot of the times our karma is something that we need to live through, we need to experience. A spiritual teacher with a large following in the USA, named Meher Baba, likewise elucidates the workings of karma. And he quotes, "You, as a gross body, are born again and again until you realize your real self. You, as mind, are born only once and die only once. In this sense, you do not reincarnate. The gross body keeps changing, but mind, mental body, remains the same throughout. All impressions, samskaras, are stored in the mind. The impressions are either to be spent or counteracted through fresh karma in successive incarnations. You are born male, female, rich, poor, brilliant, dull. To have that richness of experience which helps to transcend all forms of duality. This is in order to have that experience, because that transcendent experience that transcends all forms of duality is also all forms of duality. And that's why we experience all this duality, in order to get this inherent richness of experience of the transcendental one. Now, Stephen Arroyo continues. I doubt whether anyone who is familiar with the accuracy and profound usefulness of astrology would deny that the natal birth chart reveals in symbolic form the individual's primary life pattern, the potentials, talents, attachments, problems, and dominant mental characteristics. If this is so, then the birth chart obviously reveals a blueprint or X-ray of the soul's present pralabdha or fate karma for this life. Now, Stephen Arroyo showed in great detail in his book, Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements, which is a classic book. I prefer this one. This is his further integration of all the principles of that book. But in his first book, Astrology, Psychology, and the Four Elements, he says that the birth chart can be viewed as revealing the individual's pattern of energy, which manifests on all levels simultaneously: physical, mental, emotional, and inspirational, corresponding with the four elements: earth, air, water, and fire. The Sinchit, or reserve karma, is not indicated in the birth chart, since it is not allotted to this lifetime. Likewise, the Kriyaman karma is also not indicated in the birth chart either, since we seem to have some degree of freedom, limited though it may be, in determining what karma we will create in the present based on the past. Hence, I do not want to give the impression by speaking of fate, destiny, and similar terms, that there is nothing we can do or be in response to our karma that will change our lives in a positive way. On the contrary, although the birth chart shows the karma and hence the restrictions that bind us and prevent our feeling free, the chart is also a tool that enables us to see clearly in what areas of life we need to work towards. Although the birth chart shows the karma and hence the restrictions that bind us and prevent our feeling free, the chart is also a tool that enables us to see clearly in what areas of life we need to work toward transmuting our current mode of expression. Big run-on sentence. As Edgar Cayce says repeatedly in his readings, mind is the builder. We become what our mind dwells upon. If, therefore, we can subtly alter our attitudes and modes of thought, we can attune our consciousness to some higher frequency by meditation, by not only having, but also by living an ideal, then we can begin to be liberated from bondage and to breathe freely with the rhythm of life. If we can attune our consciousness to some higher frequency by meditation, by not only having, but also by living an ideal, then we can begin to be liberated from bondage and to breathe freely with the rhythm of life. Indeed, as one of the 20th century's greatest astrologers, Dane Rudyard, has emphasized in his extensive writings, events don't happen to people in nearly as important a way as people happen to events. These 4 words sum up the possibilities of our spiritual psychological development as we meet our karma, whether pleasant or distressing. In other words, our attitude towards experience is the crucial factor. Our attitude alone will determine whether, in meeting difficult experiences, we will suffer and curse our fate, or whether we will grow by learning the lessons that life is teaching us. The chart, therefore, shows our mind patterns, our past conditioning, the mental impressions and patterns referred to by Meher Baba as samskaras. The chart shows what we are now because of what we have thought and done in the past. These age-old, deeply entrenched patterns are not easily changed. Let this be said without qualification. It is not a simple matter to change powerful habit patterns merely through the application of a bit of old-fashioned willpower, even magic, although magick is a critical philosophical exponent for the working out of these things. Neither do these karmic patterns essentially change by glossing them over with the faddish jargon of some of the New Age psychotherapies or philosophies that inflate the ego by encouraging people to assert, I'm taking charge of my life. Positive affirmation, the secret. I make everything happen. I now know that I'm making myself suffer, etc. Human spiritual evolution is much subtler than that. The old, where there's a will, there's a way approach to dealing with one's problems collapses when the challenge is too intense. And the attempt to rationalize one's conflicts and spiritual crises out of existence will only dam the flow of the life energies for a short while, quickly followed by a torrential release of power that starkly reveals the shallowness of pseudo-spiritual escapism. There's a word for this, spiritual gaslighting. There's a big fad like in Facebook where like fake light workers, this type of pseudo light worker consciousness that just says just everything is fine, just gotta put out a good vibe. The karmic patterns are real and powerful. Those habits are not going to fade away overnight following a short positive thinking pep talk. These life forces must be accepted, acknowledged, and paid due attention. Self-knowledge and self-realization is a necessary prelude to God realization. Oh, that's so good. I love his writing. Self-knowledge and self-realization is a necessary prelude to God realization. But in the early stages, a student of spiritual truths or a student of higher forms of astrology often becomes discouraged when his or her new insights into the self reveal so many negative traits, emotions, and habit patterns. Oh crap, I got Venus in Virgo. I suck at loving people, right? It's at this point in the individual's development that great care must be applied and exercised both by that person and by any person, astrologer or otherwise, who attempts to counsel or guide that student. It should be explained that just as opening a door, a small crack, and allowing a beam of light into a dark room reveals all kinds of dust in the air and perhaps other dirt that was not previously apparent in the room. So, when the first steps towards self-knowledge are taken, whether utilizing the beam of light, known as astrology, or another illuminating method, the student very often quickly develops a negative attitude towards his or her self, their destiny, their birth chart, etc. It should be further explained that as the intensity of light and awareness increases, the student will become even more immediately aware of his or her faults, weaknesses, or negative qualities, but that such awareness is to be welcomed as an indication of greater self-knowledge and definite developmental progress. I've experienced this myself. Reading this book, like I read this book around 2014. And when I first read this, I was getting into the spiritual, shallow escapism consciousness, and I read about my chart and I just was kind of demoralized, just like, ugh, is this what I'm supposed to be? Am I supposed to embody this in order to express my best self? And I felt kind of bad about it, and it's just an awkward place to be when you're first getting into astrology as an earnest spiritual advocate or aspirant. The student should be encouraged to use such insight as a prod toward taking definite constructive action in the positive transformation of the individual life, rather than as a reason or excuse for fear or anxiety. Further, it can be pointed out to the student that as the level of self-knowledge increases, the person's karma often begins to manifest on a subtler level, since he or she is now open to learning what must be learnt about the self. And hence, there is no longer the need for shocks or dramatic events to awaken the individual from the slumber of spiritual lethargy. As Carl Jung points out, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate, quote unquote. That is to say, when the individual does not become conscious of his inner contradictions, The world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposite halves. That's coming from, it's a quote from Carl Gustav Jung in his book Aion, A-I-O-N, page 71. Hence, it seems safe to say that a commitment to self-development and self-knowledge not only holds out the promise of aiding the individual to be a more whole, happy, and illuminated soul in the future, but also that such a step often begins to alleviate a great deal of suffering in the present once the initial confusion and discouragement is overcome. We can thus see that we all have certain karmic influences that we must meet. We all must reap the fruits of what we have sown. Astrology, by providing us with a blueprint of our attachments, problems, talents, and mental tendencies, it offers us a way, an initial step of not only realizing in a specific sense exactly what our karma is and helping us to work out these confrontations within and without, but also a way of beginning to rise above and gain a perspective on this karma. The idea that the individual birth chart reflects what we have done in the past is confirmed in Edgar Cayce's psychic reading, and this is number 124L1. The idea that the individual birth chart reflects what we've done in the past is confirmed in Edgar Cayce's psychic reading as follows. For, as given from the beginning, the planets, the stars, are given for signs and for seasons and for years, that many may indeed find their closer relationship in the contemplation of the universe. For man has been made a co-creator with the Godhead. Not that man is good or bad according to the position of the stars, but the position of the stars indicate what the individual entity has done about God's plan in earth activities during the periods when man has been given the opportunity to enter into material manifestations. The birth chart shows, therefore, the past creative use or the misuse of our powers. If we accept the idea of the power of the individual's mind and will, then we must also accept the idea that we are responsible for our own fate, our own destiny, and problems as shown in the natal chart. In an important sense, we can then even say that the birth chart shows nothing but karma. Everything in the chart can then be assumed to stem directly from our past actions, achievements, and desires. Although Saturn alone has been called the planet of karma in many writings, this is an oversimplification. Indeed, astrology could legitimately be called a science of karma. That is, a way of realizing and accepting one's responsibilities in a precise way. Wonderful. Good stuff. Oh yeah, we got quite a bit to go here. We're really only just getting started with all this stuff. Now, we've really taken a lot to talk about this first part of what karma is. Now we're going to talk about specific chart factors related to karma. I'm just wondering if I should start splitting these up into different parts. Part 2, karma. Karma, specific chart factors. I think I'm going to do that for now, ladies and gentlemen. if you're watching, sorry to keep kind of like keeping things spinning like this, but I like the idea of cutting these into discernible video lengths for anybody who wants to watch and break down these sections into digestible pieces. For you, those of you watching live, if you'd like to join me in just doing the whole thing right now, please feel free. Our next episode is going to be talking about specific chart factors related to karma. I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. If you've been watching, I hope you enjoy. There's more to come in this series, and I'm breaking it up so that you can enjoy it in your own time. I hope you've enjoyed.